This podcast is made possible by UMBC's Institute for Extended Learning, offering non-credit courses in biotech, software engineering, community leadership, DEI and project management, and more. No application process required, and many courses can transfer. More at professional.umbc.edu.
Good afternoon and welcome. It's midday. I'm Tom Hall. Very glad you are with us. And I am delighted today to welcome back to Midday the writer Elizabeth Strout. She is the best-selling author of 9 novels and many short stories. She's also edited several collections. In 2009, she won the Pulitzer Prize for a terrific book, Olive Kittredge. A film adaptation of that book on HBO starred Frances McDormand and won 8 Emmy Awards. Elizabeth Strout has revisited 2 of her iconic characters in subsequent books. We met Olive Kittredge once more in Olive Again, and Olive makes an appearance in Elizabeth Strout's latest novel, too. In this new book, Strout keeps us current with another one of her magnificent characters, Lucy Barton. It's the 4th novel in which Lucy figures prominently. Like her book, Oh, William, from last year, Strout centers this one on Lucy's friendship with her first husband, a successful scientist named William Gerhardt. The setting is a small town in Maine where Lucy and William have sequestered themselves at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. I love Lucy Barton, and I love this novel. Lucy is a wonderful character, and Elizabeth Strout is a wonderful writer who brings us into Lucy's loving and insightful mind with grace and compassion. The novel is out today. It's called Lucy by the Sea. Elizabeth Strout joins us on Zoom from New York. Liz, welcome back.
Hi, nice to, excuse me, goodness, it's nice to talk with you again.
Well, it's always great to talk to you, and I got to tell you, to paraphrase the great philosopher Britney Spears, whoops, you've done it again. This is a terrific, wonderful book. The experience of reading this book is just a wonderful human experience. So thank you for that.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. Thank you very much.
There's a part in this book where Lucy, who, not unlike yourself, is a successful author, says that it's hard for praise to get in her. I wonder, is it difficult when people compliment you on your work? Sometimes that can be an awkward conversation. I mean, how does it strike you when, you've won the Pulitzer Prize and everything. You've certainly been recognized, but when folks say, "Oh, I loved your book," is that a tough thing to respond to?
No, I'm actually very happy to hear it.
Well, good. And I'll say it more than once in the hour that we have together. And by the way, congratulations! Your last book, Oh, William, has been shortlisted for the Booker Prize. That's terrific. And boy, this one, Lucy by the Sea, came out awfully quick.
Yeah.
It's less than a year. We spoke less than a year ago about Oh, William. What's going on there?
I don't know. Well, I think partly just the pandemic, I didn't have to do anything except write and walk. I took my walks and wrote. So I think that was one reason that I was able to really concentrate so fully on Lucy by the Sea. And
I wonder if in that way, COVID, and of course this book takes place during the beginning of COVID, did it change your routine dramatically? As a writer, you spend pretty much every day that you're not on the road, doing appearances, getting up and writing. I wondered, was it a dramatic shift when you were sequestered?
It was a dramatic shift, oddly, because you're right. Mostly I do just sit around and write, but not being able to see people or not being able to go to restaurants, it was a very strange time for me as well as everybody.
I was fascinated that Lucy, the character, when she was confronted with COVID, she didn't write. And she said she couldn't even read.
Right.
Where do you think that comes from?
Well, I think Lucy's been through a lot. I mean, her husband had died the year before. She never expected to find herself in Maine, for more than a couple of weeks. And, her daughters are separated from her. And I think that she just was, my sense of having concentrated so hard to see everything through Lucy's eyes. I just think that she was just kind of stalled by it all.
Have you talked to other writer buddies who've had that same experience? I mean, I think COVID had the potential, at least, to be an incredibly productive time for people, or an incredibly moribund time for people.
Right. I think the writers that I know said that they were very productive during it. But I'm sure there probably are some that were not as well. But yeah.
I was talking, I don't know, it was probably during the height of COVID with a good friend of yours, Ann Patchett, and we were both kind of secretly admitting something inside us that didn't mind the fact that our schedules were a lot less busy.
Right.
There was something comforting about going to
Right.
work, coming home.
I've heard people say that as well. My daughter felt that way. But I mean, she got COVID right away. Oh dear. But she was fine. She and her husband were fine. But she did admit to me she just didn't mind settling down to work.
Yeah. I mean, did you have any, did the loss of, the stuff that you and your family did socially, and the other stuff you're doing besides writing, did the loss of that affect the rhythm of your work? I mean, did it throw you into work more enthusiastically, or maybe that's the wrong verb, but
I think it did. I think it did because I was free to just do the work and to just really, like I said, just be concentrating on Lucy. And as you know, I come from Maine, and the coastline was so familiar to me, and yet all of a sudden I thought, wait a minute, let's look at this through Lucy's eyes. And it was fascinating because I realized she'd never seen that before. So I just kept trying so much to stay behind Lucy's eyes as I was observing, a familiar territory to myself and making it very unfamiliar for her.
Yeah, she grew up in the Midwest and then has been a New Yorker for a long time. And Maine is a magical place for a lot of us. It certainly is for me as a tourist who goes up there, and always enjoys seeing it. Alice McDermott, a wonderful writer who's, I'm a big fan of, wrote a book called What About the Baby? And it's about the art of writing fiction. And she talks about the experience of reading being so unique in that you are being spoken to from what she refers to as the silence of the page. And I think that's a wonderful way of framing it.
Exactly.
This is a first person account. Lucy addresses the reader. And so that's purposeful because it's very intimate, this experience of hearing Lucy talk.
Right. Lucy's voice, when it first came to me with My Name is Lucy Barton, it was her voice that I realized Lucy is her voice. And the voice is very intimate and sort of quiet, but sort of urgent and sort of halting. So as long as I could hold on to her voice and see everything, from her eyes, from her new eyes up in Maine, then I could sort of manage it,
And does her voice change in your estimation? Does it change dramatically because she's in this strange situation? She's away from New York, her home, her kids, and she's in this quiet place with her former husband?
No, I think that her voice, stayed very much Lucy. But as the book progresses, she, this sounds silly, but she sort of grows up, in a way, and so the voice becomes a little bit more serious, I think, as the book comes to its close.
Elizabeth Strout is my guest. She has just published today a new book, Lucy by the Sea. It's midday. I'm Tom Hall. And Liz, I wonder if we could ask you to read the very beginning of the book, the first page up until the end of the second paragraph, the middle of page 4, to sort of set the scene for folks and get an idea of Lucy's beautiful voice.
Okay. Like many others, I did not see it coming. But William is a scientist, and he saw it coming. He saw it sooner than I did, is what I mean. William is my first husband. We were married for 20 years, and we have been divorced for about that long as well. We are friendly. I would see him intermittently. We both were living in New York City, where we came when we first married. But because my second husband had died and his third wife had left him, I had seen him more this past year. About the time his third wife left him, William found out that he had a half-sister in Maine. He found it out on an ancestry website. He had always thought he was an only child, so this was a tremendous surprise for him. And he asked me to go up to Maine for 2 days with him to find her, and we did, but the woman, her name is Lois Bubar. Well, I met her, but she did not want to meet William, and this made him feel very terrible. Also, on that trip to Maine, we found out things about William's mother that absolutely dismayed him. They dismayed me as well. His mother had come from unbelievable poverty, it turned out, even worse than the circumstances I had come from.
That's, in less than a minute, you've told us everything we need to know about what happened in previous books. So it's not necessary for anyone to have read My Name is Lucy Barton or Oh, Will You. You don't have to have read the other books to get this one.
Right, exactly.
And I think we've talked about this before, but is that tricky? I mean, as you're in the middle of this new book, do you have to keep in mind, they may not know this, they may not remember this, I got to remind them of that? I mean,
I just sort of assume that they don't, or that they haven't read it or whatever. And I try and very lightly give them what they need, so that if they have read it, they're not bored to tears. And if they haven't read it, then they understand what's going on. So I want every book to be able to stand on its own.
And is writing different for you now as an older writer? I mean, you and I are about the same age, in our mid-60s. You and I graduated from college in 1977, but your first book didn't come out until you were in your early 40s. It was 20-something years later. And then there was an interregnum of 8 years between the first one and the second one. But now you're just, you're pumping them out fast and furious. I mean, how is it? I mean, obviously people get better at stuff once they are, practiced at it. Is that what's happening here?
I do. I think that's absolutely what's happening. I mean, I had certainly been practicing before that first book came out, in my early 40s. I'd been practicing for years, but I hadn't been able to figure it out. And then I still, was stumbling around a little bit. But I think, honestly, yes, I think at this point in my life, I have a much better sense of, what will work and what won't work. And so I can throw it away a lot faster, the bad stuff.
Yeah, and that's a big part of writing is the punting stuff.
Right, to just recognize, actually, this is awful, so it's just going to go on the floor, and then we'll try again.
Yeah. You had a brief stint as a lawyer. Yeah, which you may not be want to be reminded of, but how did you know you didn't want to be a lawyer? I mean, it's one thing to know what you want to do when you grow up. It's another thing to really discern what you don't want to do. Sometimes when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to do. I mean, that was a while ago, a long time ago. But how did you lasted how long? Just a few months, right?
6 months.
Yeah.
And, I had never really set out to be a lawyer, but nobody was interested in my writing at all. And I thought, well, I had a social conscience, and I thought, well, I'll go to law school and do good work and then write at night, which of course was, very misinformed me. But anyway, the point is that law school was one thing, but practicing law was entirely different. And I was just so bad at it. I was terrible at it. And I was surprised at how seriously bad I was at it, because I just didn't seem to be able to advocate for people, and that was painful. So I think, I do remember thinking, well, I could probably be a terrible lawyer for many years, or I could just stop and just throw myself, over the cliff and hope that I'm can make a success as a writer.
Well, I'm glad you were bad at it because you've given so much joy to so many people as a writer. But that's interesting to me because I would think that that skill of understanding how another person thinks would be a terrific skill for an advocate.
Well, at that point, I was young, and at that point, I was there. I was just I was very intimidated, and there had only been, I think, 7 women in the law class, out of I don't know how many, but it was just a handful of us. And one day, I was in front of a judge, and he said, "Oh, you've got really good legs," and I thought, "Oh my goodness." But I didn't say anything because, I was too scared, and it was back in the day when you didn't really say things. But I was just not prepared for what I found in the world of lawyers and the courtroom at all. Not prepared at all.
Yeah, well, you somehow figured out how to prepare yourself to be an author because, boy, it's worked out well. My guest is Elizabeth Strout. Her new novel is called Lucy by the Sea. We'll have more with Elizabeth Strout on the other side of a quick break. It's midday. I'm Tom Hall. Stay with us.
This is 88.1 WYPR.
And welcome back. It's midday. I'm Tom Hall. By the way, on our show tomorrow, the question of term limits for the mayor of Baltimore and other local officials. In November, voters in Baltimore and in Anne Arundel County will vote on referendums to impose term limits. I'll talk about it tomorrow with 2 former Baltimore mayors, Kurt Schmoke and Sheila Dixon. That's coming up here on Midday tomorrow. If you've just joined us today, my guest is Elizabeth Strout. We're talking about her latest novel. It's out today. It's terrific. It's called Lucy by the Sea. To join our conversation, 410-662-8780, our email midday@wypr.org, and our Twitter handles @midday_WYPR. So this is a book that is about, to some extent, the experience of COVID in those early months, and there was a difference between the way New Yorkers experienced it and Mainers experienced it. You've got personal experience in both places. Was there anything specific about COVID you were trying to get at when it came to that aspect of this novel?
It's funny, Tom, because I feel in a certain way, which might be strange to say, but COVID was the backdrop. Because I am so interested in character that I wanted to figure out what it was like for Lucy and her ex-husband William to be stuck in that house on the cliff during COVID. But my real interest was in them and discovering who they were and who they were to each other. And I remember like when I would write the dialogue between them, I thought, oh, this is so interesting because they actually really know each other. And that was so interesting for me to discover in their dialogue, that they knew each other in a way that even went beyond the fact that they had met when they were young. There's some sort of connection that they do have with each other.
That's interesting, too, because to see the two of them, isolated by themselves, with this long history, in this small town, this small little place. The isolation is a big, almost character in this book too. I mean, you're exploring loneliness, and it's certainly very possible to be very lonely, even though there's somebody else hanging around. Right,
and yet they make their way through that, and with some real surprises on the way. I mean, I don't want to give them away, but I realized that, when there are people, there are things that happen no matter what. So I was trying to really focus on them. And I think the most difficult part of the book for me was to get the sense of time down, because that was, time imploded with the pandemic. It just became meaningless in a way, because every day was the same. What was the weekend? What was the week? It didn't seem to matter. And so to try and get that on the page at the same time that you want a narrative thrust to be taking the reader forward, that was a bit of a challenge. But that's when I realized, okay, well, things are still going to be happening.
Yeah, and your handling of time is beautiful. I mean, there are, scenes. I mean, stuff happens throughout this book. Do you think of your novels in terms of, individual scenes? Is it the scene that strikes you that might be fun to write, or is there a turn of phrase that someone might make in a dialogue? How does it usually begin for you?
It usually is. It is scenes, and that's been true for a number of years. Way back when my daughter was small and I only had a certain number of hours per day or even per week to work, I just began to realize, let's just do this in scenes, and as long as the scene had what I would call a heartbeat to it, then it could stay on the table. And if it didn't, and many of them don't, then they just get literally thrown on the floor for the moment. But then the scenes will eventually connect. So I don't really write anything from beginning to end. Even this book, I didn't write from beginning to end. I would write different scenes and then watch them sort of align themselves.
Elizabeth Strout, the new book is called Lucy by the Sea. It's midday. I'm Tom Hall. There seems to be a kind of a COVID literary genre coming up. I mean, because there are a lot of people who've been writing COVID books. I think the New York Times mentioned Gary Steingart's book, Our Country Friends, which my wife read and thought was terrific. I haven't had a chance to read them. Did you read them? I mean, were you at all?
Read them. Yeah. I have not read them because I just needed to stay into my own COVID experience.
Yeah.
Or Lucy's strange little time.
Yeah, so there's nothing that they can add to your sort of just general understanding of how people are treating this thing, as you say.
Right, because it was Lucy. It was Lucy's turn, Lucy's time.
Yeah,
and William.
And when it comes, I'm sorry. Let me finish.
No, I'm just saying I had to stay in Lucy's head. So
yeah. I also read in the New York Times, all the news that's fit to print, that you're a piano player. You're a pianist. So
yeah.
Did you play a lot during COVID? Did you have extra time to practice?
Yes, I did. Yeah. I would play like an hour or two every day. I usually try and play an hour a day, but I played more during COVID. Yeah.
And what do you play?
Well, I actually play mostly Mozart at this point in my life.
And is there a particular affinity for Mozart now that you didn't have before?
Well, it's funny because when I was young, like I studied piano for 12 years with a concert pianist, a retired concert pianist. I was lucky enough to have him teach me, and he was very much into Mozart, which is why I've returned to it after so many years. And what's interesting is that I feel like I understand the things that he was trying to tell me better now. It's like he would talk about the two-note phrases, and I understand now what he was talking about. And I probably sort of understood it, but not really. There's just I have a deeper feeling for him and for Mozart and for my poor teacher who's passed away, obviously. And I think it's just because I've had more life experience,
Because first of all, Mozart's difficult. You have to be a good piano player in order to be able to play it. And he was just so forthcoming with incredible structure and incredible tunes and incredible inspiration. Do you write musically? It strikes me as a musical writer.
I do. I do. That's a very good point, Tom. Thanks for that. Because yes, I am always trying to, first of all, think about what the reader needs. I'm always with the reader as I'm writing, but I'm very much conscious of how the sentence falls on the reader's ear, because that to me makes the experience what it is. You see? Yeah.
And there's a lot of wonderful balance and, antecedent followed by the resolution, and it's interesting that you say that Mozart is a particular interest of yours now? Because it strikes me as Mozartian. As a musician who I've conducted and played a bit of Mozart, but there's a sonata in G major, ba da da ba dum
Yeah.
da da dum ba dum. So you got question answer,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
there's a balance,
Yeah.
because how it strikes the ear is so crucial. But
Yes.
it sounds to me like you read this stuff out loud and you hone it to just the right rhythm.
Thank you, because like I said, it's just it has to fall on the reader's ear properly.
And as the characters have evolved, I mean, there's a couple of characters. One, Bob Burgess, is in this book. He figured prominently in a best-selling book you had called The Burgess Boys. And there's this wonderful, warm friendship between Bob Burgess and Lucy Barton. You've got Olive Kittredge, makes a couple of appearances. We hear a little bit about Olive. I mean, the young audience writers, the authors, are prone to do series of things. Do you think of the Lucy books and the Olive Kittredge books as parts of series? I mean, are you thinking long term about either of these characters?
I never intended to write about any of them again. I never thought I would write about Olive. And then I wrote Olive again just because she showed up. She just showed up as vividly as she had the first time. So I thought, okay, let's go. But I never intended to. And then with Lucy, I never thought I would write more about her, but I seem to have done that. So it's something unconscious that's working, with me.
At one point in this novel, Lucy says it's odd that the mind does not take in anything until it can.
Right.
Which is so powerful. Right. And are you conscious of how Lucy is taking in stuff now that she wasn't able to take in the first couple books?
Yes, I was very conscious of that. And I can remember when I actually wrote that sentence, and I realized, oh, that's a true sentence. That will stay right there. I'll have to figure out where to put it, but but I actually do remember writing that sentence. And yes, I was very, like I said, I just had to concentrate so much to be in Lucy's head and to understand what her thought process was under these new conditions.
Elizabeth Strout's new book is called Lucy by the Sea. It's midday. I'm Tom Hall. That sentence also strikes me, Liz, as a recognition, an acknowledgement of the sort of self-preservation that we all need to indulge in terms of what we need to avoid at certain times of our lives.
But exactly. And that's what I realized when I wrote it. I thought, oh, on so many levels, this is true because, and then Lucy herself has the problem of looking away, which sort of continues throughout the book a bit. She has to look away from the television. She has to look away when her husband shows her friend's death on his computer. She looks away, and that became a little bit of a motif until toward the end of the book when she's not looking away so much.
Have you changed your mind? Do you find yourself changing your mind about where Lucy is headed as time goes on, and in the process of writing this book? I mean, did you as an author evolve in where you think Lucy will end up in the way that the character has clearly evolved? I mean, Lucy is a bit different than she was in My Name is Lucy Barton. And obviously that's purposeful because you're the one that invented Lucy. I'm talking about Lucy as if she's, my best friend. But she's a figment of your imagination.
She's your friend. Don't think just because she's not real doesn't mean she can't be your friend. But yes, I do. I am aware of her evolution, and there were many surprises, like I think I said, that occurred as I was writing, which is always good because if I'm not surprised, you won't be surprised. But anyway, I was interested in watching her grow, evolve, because I think people continue to. That was the whole purpose of Olive Again, was to watch her continue to grow, continue to be curious, continue to be kind in bizarre ways and blunt in not necessarily kind ways,
Yeah.
But she continued to grow, Olive, in my mind, because I think that there's a myth that people have that after a certain point, people just don't grow anymore. They just sort of sit there and then ride out the rest of their lives. But I just don't find that to be true. As I get older myself and I watch people around me get older, I think that people are always continuing to either grow bigger or to grow smaller, but changing all the time.
Always changing, absolutely. And I think that's absolutely true. But again, I think one of the genius of this in your concoction of these characters is that if you don't know anything about Lucy other than what you know from this novel, it's perfectly fine. You see an evolution within this novel. But if you know everything there is to know about Lucy because you've read the other books, it's also fun on that level. So where you start almost doesn't matter, which is
exactly. I don't think so. I don't think it matters.
But I think that's partially because she does have such a rich history, whether you're aware of it or not.
Right. Exactly.
And that's that's fun to think about.
Right.
She says, and again, this character Lucy Barton is an author for folks who haven't read these books. She says at one point, I've always wanted my books to help people. And you can understand why she would say this, because she is a very generous, gracious, interesting person who feels deeply for other people. But I wonder if that can the same be said from you as an author? Do books need to help people?
Well, I personally would hope that my books help people. I'm not here to say what books need to do or don't need to do, but that came from My Name is Lucy Barton, when she was staying after school all those days just to stay warm. And she began to read books, and they opened up the world to her. And that's when she realized, I'm going to write books and people will feel less lonely. And so I thought, okay, that makes sense for Lucy, because, that would be her trajectory. And I certainly hope that my books, when I say help people, what am I trying to say? I would like my books to, I think I would like when somebody puts one of my books down to just sort of feel that maybe they've been seen in a way that they didn't know, or I would like to be articulating things that are not always articulated about other people, and therefore about the reader, whoever they might be. So if people can read books and understand somebody new through my book, that's great. But if they can also recognize themselves, that's even better. And I just want them to put the book down and realize, oh, okay, I get it. It's just life. All right, I know that. It's just life.
It's just life indeed, and it's a beautiful life to consider. It's called Lucy by the Sea. Elizabeth Strout is my guest. This is the new book. It's out today. We will have more with Elizabeth Strout after a quick break. I'm Tom Hall. It's midday. Stay with us.
This is your NPR news station, 88.1 WYPR.
And welcome back. It's midday. I'm Tom Hall. If you've just joined us, my guest is the author Elizabeth Strout. She won the Pulitzer Prize in 2009 for her novel about a blunt and irascible school teacher named Olive Kittredge. She revisited Olive in 2019 in her novel Olive Again. And 4 of her 9 books, including her latest, feature another of Strout's most endearing and wonderful characters, Lucy Barton. Lucy is a successful writer who was raised in poverty in the Midwest and for years has lived in New York. In the new novel, Lucy and her ex-husband, with whom she's maintained a close friendship, retreat during the first year of the pandemic to a small town in coastal Maine. It's called Lucy by the Sea. To join our conversation, 410-662-8780, our email midday@wipr.org. Our Twitter handle is @midday_WIPR. So, Liz, I read this book while I was in Maine. I saved it.
Were you on the coast?
I was. We were in Southwest Harbor visiting friends. I can think of 3 people that I've known from here in Baltimore who have moved to Maine. And we ran into a couple of other people from Baltimore in Maine while we were up there. So Maine's a very attractive, popular spot for Marylanders, at least, if not people from all over the country. But I saved it. I saved your book until we were there. We actually trudged through New England and couch surfed with various friends in Vermont, and New Hampshire, and New York, and Maine, and Connecticut. So there is a particular charm, a particular wonder to Maine. I've not been up there in the winter in a long time, but I've been up there in the summer a couple of times in the last few years. You're a New Yorker and a Mainer. I guess you wrote this one in Maine, but in terms of the location, I mean, she's looking. We talked earlier about it. Lucy's looking at the ocean, in a different way than you might look at it, having grown up there. How important is the setting to Lucy's frame of mind?
Well, I thought it was a great sort of place to put her because, first of all, it's not familiar to her, so she's going to be even more upended. And then, and yet it's exquisitely beautiful, even in the winter, which is very harsh up there. And Lucy is so miserable in that, March and April period where it snows in April, and she's just trying to get used to it all. But I think that the setting for me was important because it made it very specific to her certain kind of experience of the pandemic.
There was a tension between locals in Maine and others who did what Lucy and William did, which was flee to Maine from Manhattan and other places. That's a real thing, and you write about that in this book. Right.
That's right. And it's funny because I've heard from other people in other cities and other rural areas. So I'm not sure it's just Maine, but somebody was talking to me about the tensions between, city people running out into the rural areas to get away from the pandemic. But yeah, there's always traditionally been a little tension between Maine and New York because New Yorkers, come up for the summer and Mainers are very reticent and taciturn and, a little bit, they are themselves, So there is automatically going to be a certain amount of tension between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the governor of Maine requiring proof of vaccination and stuff just to cross the border from New England into Maine. This is not international travel. We're talking about domestic travel. They were not bashful about keeping people out.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is an interesting thing to explore in a small town setting. I mean, this book doesn't take place in Portland. I mean, it takes place.
No, Portland's an entirely different thing altogether.
Yeah.
Right. No, but Crosby is a very, it's a small town and people have lived there for a long time. And people coming in from New York are not particularly going to be welcome, although, anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting dynamic in this book. and again, back to Lucy, who, and I think we talked about this the last time. I think I'm in love with Lucy Barton. You know, like if I were like on a dating app or something, I would Lucy Barton would be and I have not been on a dating app ever. I mean, but I've also been married 36 years. So I mean, I'm not thinking about going on a dating app. But if I were, I would want a woman like Lucy Barton to be able to go to dinner. But her magnanimity. There's one scene in the book where she even realizes that she has some degree of understanding of the people who rioted at the Capitol on January 6th. So
that's right.
What are the things that lead her to those kinds of conclusions? What makes her so good?
You know, I think it's her background. Well, first of all, I think she was born with her certain nature. Because her sister was not able to escape her background, and nor was her brother. But Lucy's background is always a part of who she is, and she remembers it every day of her life. She lives with that sense of humiliation. She doesn't talk about it so much with William because he's tired of hearing about it, but she lives with it every day, and she recognizes that she understands that she's been extremely fortunate. But she also understands people who have not been extremely fortunate, and the humiliation and the anger that they will feel.
She's hard on herself in that respect, I think.
Well, she never had much of parenting, you know.
Yeah. There's a scene where she's standing in line and there's an elderly man standing in the line, and she could have helped him out in a way that another person in the line did, but she didn't. I mean, again, I'm sorry to give stuff away about the book, but it's a touching scene because she scorns. You know, she's scornful towards herself. She says, "Oh, I should have been the one helping out."
Right. She's very upset that she didn't do that.
I mean,
that's because she's Lucy, and because she has a feeling for vulnerable people. Let's put it that way, you know, because I think she has felt so vulnerable most of her life that when she sees somebody vulnerable, she feels that she should be doing something for them.
And placed next to the other character that so many people know you for, Olive Kittredge.
I know.
I mean, they couldn't be more different. I mean,
I know. That's completely different.
Yeah. I mean, does that keep you sane as a writer to alternate in between those two so that you...
I think it must, because they're just so different. Yeah.
And again, you know, when you talk about how you write by scenes, how do the characters then get developed? I mean, if you are to invent a new character for, you know, a future project, do the characters, because you are so character based, and we hear the voice of these characters. I mean, they just ring in our hearts. How does a character evolve?
You know, it's so funny because honestly, I thought about this and I just don't quite know, but they arrive in different ways. And if I can find my way into them, then I will work with them. And if they sort of sidle up to me in a certain way, but then I can't find my way into them, then I won't work with them. And I mean, you know, excuse me, Olive Kittredge was, you know, she was just so Olive that I could work with her right away because she was just so right out there. And then Lucy's voice was the one, you know, it was her voice that I could hear and almost see, you know, as a thin, fine gold thread. And so they were available to me rather quickly. But, you know, people like Pete Barton, you know, Lucy's brother, like that was very interesting when I wrote about him in Anything Is Possible, because I thought, I'm not sure if he's going to be compelling enough to me. But then I realized, oh, he is. He absolutely is. He's got his, like I could get into his head. I felt like I could inhabit him. So he stayed. And now, you know, he's in this book as well. And Vicky, her sister. So I don't, but I honestly, the truth is I just don't really know where they come from. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay, because it's okay to have a little mystery in this whole business here.
Yeah, you know? There is a little bit of mystery going on with this, yeah.
Yeah, and nothing wrong with that. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to have George Saunders on the show. He's got a new collection of short
wow,
stories,
yeah.
and he's just another one of my favorites. He's just a terrific,
Yeah.
terrific writer,
Wonderful.
and you know, he bends the sort of the envelope all the time
All the time.
for what
Yeah.
a short story should be. But his last book is a sort of pedagogical thing about how to teach Russian short stories, and it's fascinating because it's based on the actual teaching of writing that he does at Syracuse University,
Right.
and he has all sorts of insights as to what makes a great story great. You edited a few collections of short stories. I mean, it's been 10 or 11 years for at least one of them. But is it just sort of, you know, readily apparent? Is there something that you always know is going to make a good story good, whether you're you know, evaluating your own work or the work of another writer?
You know, I think for me, it sounds a little crazy, but it's pretty basic. I remember as a child walking through the library and, you know, the grown-up section, and just walking through and pulling books off. And honestly, it was almost like, if I don't mean literally, but there was a sense of the text rising up toward me a little bit. And if that happened, then I read that book. And if it didn't happen, then I didn't. And so I think even now, like when I read a story, you know, I edited the stories of Frederick Bush. It's like, okay, if I'm just right there, if the text and I just immediately merge, then that to me is a good story.
So that first sentence is super important then.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, can you explain a little bit more about how that text rises up to you? I love that notion.
Yeah. It's just a little, I mean, like, I think, like, and I've thought about this, and I think that there are certain writers who write very densely, which is fine, but I because I'm always so interested in the reader, I think that a certain density to the text almost keeps a reader out. Whereas, particularly with the Lucy books, I like to think of them as that there's a porousness there, and that the reader can therefore enter into the story with their own story and make it their own book in a way, you see.
Yeah, that's fascinating how the reader can kind of individualize your work as an artist.
Right. And I want that. That's interesting to me. So I want to give them space to be able to do that.
I think there's a parallel with music in that regard as well. Because
yeah, exactly. That's probably true, right?
We could be sitting in a concert hall with 2,500 other people, but each of us,
I know,
you know, absorbs and you know, engages with the sound in a different way.
Exactly. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, I mean, it's a collective experience, but it's an individual experience. Yeah,
that's right. Right.
Because that's what makes music beautiful, and that, you know,
Exactly.
and memorable. You remember where you were when you heard that song and all that stuff. I mean, it's an individual experience. Yeah, that's great.
But music also has that element of mysteriousness to it.
Sure.
You know, like every time I listen to it, I think, where did this come from? Listen to how this is made. Somebody heard this and put it down. I mean, you know, whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because that, you know, that beautiful chord change, that delicious, you know, trip of the melody that goes someplace unexpected. Yeah, it's just, you know, there's some mystery in that too. Yes, well, there's no mystery that people are going to love this book. I just can't imagine that they won't. It's called Lucy by the Sea. So Elizabeth Strout, thank you so much. Congratulations on it, and look forward to the next time we have occasion to chat.
Thank you very, very much. It's always lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much, Tom.
All right, thank you. That's it for us today. Coming up tomorrow, former Baltimore mayors Kurt Schmoke and Sheila Dixon join me to talk about Question K. That's a ballot measure that would impose term limits on future Baltimore mayors and other officials. And coming up next after news at the top of the hour, it's Here and Now. I'm Tom Hall. Thanks for being with us. Have a great day.
This is 88.1 WYPR.